men with low self-esteem were more prone to experience negative life events. They don't take care of themselves. They don't see themselves as worthy of taking care of, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. When you feel that you have worth and you have good self-esteem, you feel happy about your life. You have better relationships because you respond in ways that are just better. You respond more consciously, more aware. So what can you do? There's a few techniques that are science-backed. One of the really highly recommended ones is the things that we shy away from, the things that will help us grow. Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And today I'm going to be talking about something that comes up in, if I would say 90% of my clients, something we work on, whether it's we work on it consciously and at the forefront of mind, or it's something that's happening and we're working on as a secondary thing, which is building self-esteem. So I've did a little bit of research, and some of this stuff is based off stuff that I do with my clients anyway, and some of it's stuff that's, research and stuff. Research, science-backed, research-backed methods for building self-esteem, right? Because self-esteem is this idea. I'm going to jump into the definition actually while we're here. The definition is this self-esteem is a subjective, important to remember that, right? Evaluation of our own worth, right? The really important part there is to see that it's subjective. It's not based in necessary reality. It's just based on our opinion. You can look at it in that way, right? And it can shift and change because it's not necessarily based on reality. It can shift and change. And it's an important part of what we're going to talk about today is what we tell ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest things about what self-esteem is. Self-esteem being is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And I put my hands up and say, my self-esteem is something I continuously work on. Like a lot of the tools and techniques I'm going to talk about are things that I do weekly, daily, hourly. I do in my life because I need to, because it's very easy for me to fall into telling myself very negative stories about myself and how I'm doing and my worth and value and so forth. I'm going to talk about why that happens as well. And I see this in clients. I see this in men. So I'm going to talk into some of that as well, right? But self-esteem has been linked to better mental health, improved relationships, and overall life happiness. As you can imagine, when you feel that you have worth and you have good self-esteem, you feel happy about your life. You have better relationships because you respond in ways that are just better, right? You respond more consciously, more aware, right, to your partner instead of responding from your fears, your anxieties and worries, or your low self-esteem, right? Because that's a lot what happens. And life is just generally better, right? We've experienced that to some degree somewhere. Right. And there's a few studies, and I'll quote here. There's one study here that says that men with higher self-esteem are more likely to report higher life satisfaction, lower levels of depression and anxiety. There's another study here that found that men with low self-esteem were more prone to experience negative life events and poorer relationship satisfaction. Right. And another study here said that, our self-esteem often peaks in young adulthood and declines with age from there. And I must say, that's an experience I've had, and I talk to my clients about this a lot. A lot of men go, man, when I was younger, I was so confident. I had such high self-esteem. One of my personal theories for that is that we're often less compassionate. we're less empathetic and we're less we maybe think less about how our actions impact other people, which is easy to keep our self-esteem high, or our self-esteem is sometimes based on arrogance, right? And ego. So how does this low self-esteem manifest in people's lives, right? In personal relationships, which is, that's the world that I work in a lot with men, around personal relationships, mainly romantic, sometimes friendships, it can show up as like avoidance, right? People with low self-esteem avoid conflict and difficult conversations. I often talk about avoidant men because that being kind of the men I work with a lot. And little plug, I've got a workshop coming up on the 13th of August. Sometimes I forget. 13th of August at 7:30 p.m. UK time, about 4 avoidant men and helping them with conflict, conversation, understand their avoidance, as well as ways in which we can move past avoidance and create happy, loving relationships. Avoidant men often have low self-esteem, almost always low self-esteem, even if it's not obvious, right? And they avoid conflict, right? They fear that they are not able to handle the situation. They fear rejection. They fear that deep down that if the conflict means that there's something wrong with them or they've done something wrong, and by being in the conflict, it will be confirmed and they want to move away. Not all consciously, right? Another way in which we often you see people, low self-esteem is overcompensating. This is like people pleasing, doing more, right? If I do more for someone, then they're going to love me, right? And that's actually a very anxious way to be, nice guys, shout out Robert Glover, is a very typical thing to be. And often men experience this because we're taught in many ways that our value, right, is in what we can do, not in who we are, right? But it also sometimes, compensation can be look like controlling behavior and domination, right? Another way it shows up in my personal relationships is dependency, low self-esteem. Again, this is a very something you would typically see of nice guys or people who have anxious attachment is a dependency. It's like, I need this relationship because if I'm not in this relationship, I have no value and I have no worth, right? Another way we see it in relationships is jealousy and insecurity. People with low self-esteem get very jealous because they see that other people's value and worth is higher than them. So say my partner also meets a man who's making millions of pounds, right? This has actually happened. I get very jealous. That part didn't, I don't know, I guess there was internal jealousy that occurred. But I'm aware I saw the jealousy and it didn't really go anywhere other than allow myself to feel that I felt that jealousy. But I've seen in other friends of mine or even in clients where their jealousy spills out into them accusing their partners of things, telling their partners the partner doesn't love them or they're trying to cheat on them and so forth. And low self-esteem, there's a whole bunch of stuff here I've written down. But I think the best ones are and professional life, fear of failure, imposter syndrome, lack of ambition, difficulty with authority, whether that is stepping into authority or receiving authority as well. I think the fear of failure for me, I'm just being really honest here. I try to be honest with you. The fear of failure for me was something that's really, really there for me continuously in my work and always has been. And what you don't always realize is people who are very highly successful, high achieving individuals, they often have a incredibly painful experience, incredibly painful, if I can get my words out, incredibly painful fear of failure. It's so acute for them. It drives them. It's a very negative drive and fuel. It keeps them going, but it does lead often to burnout and all sorts. And I say this again from coaching a lot of these men who are, got $1 million businesses and, high-flying careers and C-suite people and so forth, is this fear of failure that is in their lives, professional, but also in their relationships as well. So how does it show up in low self-esteem? How does it show up in social life? Not being social, withdrawing from social occasions, right? Sometimes it's even withdrawing from the moment, right? When we have low self-esteem, we might be somewhere, we might be in a social interaction and people are talking and we're there and we're in the circle, we're on the chairs or whatever it may be, and we withdraw our energy a little bit because we're like, oh, I'm not good enough to, we might not consciously have that conversation, but we like, oh, I don't have anything to add, right? We just pull ourselves out of it a little bit. right? Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes it's very obvious. We fear being judged. We're afraid of being seen as inadequate, right? Compensating behaviors, again, similar to relationship, overdoing it, helping more, helping, right? Or the very opposite. People who are always kind of boasting and ostentatious with their success. They may wear lots of names and brands and, wear all the latest expensive stuff because they're wanting you to see that they are successful. Look at me, I'm successful, right? Low self-esteem, always. And people who you also see it is in this kind of professional world is negative comparison, but not just that. It's also like bitchiness about other people, right? They can be very much trying to pull other people down very often and so forth. And this also shows up in our mental health. And I think it's important to kind of really touch on this is like anxiety, depression are strongly linked with low self-esteem. Negative self-talk. This is the one I have to battle with a lot. This inner critic, which I've probably talking about and I speak about in my programs quite often, because I think it's a really important part as men, is this negative self-talk, the way we talk to ourselves. I bet many of you realize you talk to yourself like your worst enemy. Like people that you hate don't talk to you as bad as you talk to yourself. And this is something that's really vital to work on. It's been really vital for me. I can think of a couple of my clients. It's been really life-changing for them. Just them being able to shift how they talk to themselves. Another way it shows up is emotional reactivity. And this is in relationship a lot. This is probably one of the key things that I work on with people and I see in my programs is this emotional reactivity. When we have low self-esteem, we're easily triggered. Right? Because we are seeing things as criticism or someone slighting us or they're pointing out a flaw. And because our self-esteem is low, our ego wants to defend us and, make the world believe we've got high self-esteem. We often get emotionally reactive. It's a very, very common one. It's something I work with a lot with men. You see it in how men look after themselves, their physical bodies, the things they eat. I'm not going to go as far to say that everybody who's grossly overweight has low self-esteem, but people who have low self-esteem neglect their body often, right? They have poor diets. They don't exercise enough. They don't get enough sleep. They don't take care of themselves. They don't see themselves as worthy of taking care of, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. Substance abuse as well, chronic stress because they're working. As I said, they're overcompensating. They're trying to show the world they're good enough. If the world knows I'm good enough, then, right? And it can show up in financial ways as well. Poor, like being risk averse or overly risky. Yeah. Impulsive spending, seeing their value as the things they buy and the things they have. So it might be like I said, buying expensive cars and watches and so forth and wanting to show everybody, look at me, I'm successful, I've got money. That's a really common one I think men suffer with because we teach ourselves to be materialistic. The Andrew Tate, brigade, I've named them that. He focuses a lot on material things as being a way to show self-esteem and worth in the world. Unfortunately, it's a very ill-advised thing to do because just because you've got a Bugatti doesn't mean you think something of yourself and you talk loud. You give it the big talk. It just means you know how to talk and you're willing to defend that. You often find people with high self-esteem don't feel particularly defensive about things at all. Yeah, these are some of the ways it shows up my clients. I see it a lot in dating as well. How does low self-esteem show up in dating? Not making an effort, not trying, not actually dating, being very sensitive to rejection and seeing rejection where it's not happening. That's when a lot of that happens. Withdrawing from conversations, not really taking action. So it might be that you match with people and then you don't feel like you're good enough to actually talk to them or for them to want to be with you. So you don't actually pursue it. I have a theory that a lot of the kind of match collection, I think they call it, match collecting, is people with low self-esteem. I think it's a big part of it, that they have photos and stuff up there. And then when they actually match with people they find attractive, they freeze and they don't know what to say because they don't think they're good enough. I think that's a huge part of it. I think I'd love to partner with or talk to a dating company about doing an online dating company, do some research around that because I think it's a big part of it. And we don't have much compassion. We assume that they're somewhere malicious, like they're doing it for ego, which in a way they are, but they're not conscious of it. I see low self-esteem show up in sex as well. And that can be anything from erectile dysfunction. Often if it's really, the low self-esteem has really hit someone, erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, avoidance of sex completely, avoiding sex in a relationship with a partner is a big sign I see of low self-esteem, not thinking they're good enough in the bed, not thinking they'll be good enough to please their partners as well. Or having sex in risky situations under the influence of drink and drugs because they're trying to suppress the low self-esteem and, get that Dutch courage, as they call it, right? I don't know why they call it Dutch courage. Answers on a postcard, please, to that question. Why do we call it Dutch courage? Why don't we call it Irish courage? But maybe Irish people have courage anyway. I don't know. But you know what I mean. The drinking and drugs, we've all kind of, well, not everyone's been there. I've been there. But yeah, low self-esteem. And then low self-esteem also shows up as promiscuousness, right? Seeking lots of sex and attention from men or women to, if they're giving me attention, then I have worth, is the kind of thought in the mind, especially when we grow up in an environment where we see that's what you do to get attention. You be promiscuous, right? That's what men are meant to do. So you get your worth from having lots of sex and having lots of women, and doing all that. And then everyone's patting you on the back going, oh, well done, man. You're a great guy. And it happens like that. It really does. It really does. So now you know where it comes from, what it looks like in your life. Some of you might be sitting there thinking, oh, wow, I didn't think I had that low self-esteem, but when I look at some of my behaviors, I can see where that's showing up. That's okay. Low self-esteem doesn't mean you're a bad person. Actually, that's something really important to say. Low self-esteem doesn't mean you're a bad person. It is very, very common amongst people, even people who are highly, like I said, people who are highly successful. Some of the people who you wouldn't think have low self-esteem, some of the people you think have very high self-esteem have low self-esteem. I've just, I've seen it time and time again from people. So what are some of the challenges, right, that we face when we're trying to build self-esteem, especially in the world we live in? I think one of the first ones for men is the traditional norms around masculinity, right? As I've touched on, a lot of the kind of traditional norms of masculinity is acting a certain way. Not necessarily being, but acting. Like, I need to make lots of money. Yeah, that's a sign that I have value and worth. So we'll go out in the world and we'll do that. And we might do that in ways that are particularly good for us or good for the world. It's a very common one. Men acting in a way, and not necessarily even their fault, because that's what we've been trained to do and told what you do to be a good man, right? You provide, for instance. Or we shut down parts of our emotional capacity, for instance, thinking that being tough and hard, being David Goggins, that's self-esteem, right? Does David Goggins actually have a huge amount of self-loathing for himself? I haven't read any of his books, so I can't say. But, my feeling is like my intuitive feel from him sometimes is a huge amount of self-loathing within him. Maybe you'll argue with me, but there's just something about how he is with himself. And we'll touch on some of the exact reasons why that is. I can tell some of his self-talk is probably really, really horrible at times. Really, really mean. But I've only interacted with him a little bit through Instagram and some of his videos. Great guy, very useful, some of his work. Another way that we struggle to build self-esteem, the challenge we have in the world we live in is comparison. There's a phrase, and no one seems to know where it's come from. Comparison is the thief of all joy, but it really is. It's so easy now to compare ourselves. We're in the age of social media, and I'm not one to say that social media is necessarily bad. It isn't inherently bad. But social media does allow us to compare ourselves. If you're like me, you're a coach, you're a men's coach, you can compare yourself to hundreds of men's coaches a day, right? I can compare myself to the best men's coaches around. I've had some of them on the podcast. I really haven't. And it's a very unfair comparison to make. I'm talking to men who have got 30, 10, 20, 30 years of experience doing this. this work, or I've talked to relationship coaches, who have been, or therapists have been doing this for, their whole lifetime. It's very easy to use comparison as a way to kind of negatively look at ourselves, look at them. They're doing really well. I'm a piece of shit. It's kind of the rhetoric we have in our minds, right? And again, there's some studies around this in the UK for men aged 18 to 34. That said that social media, 50% of men found that they feel that social media negatively impacted their self-esteem, from the comparison point of view. They're comparing themselves to other people, whether that's their bodies and so forth, and feeling like they're shit or they're not good and not as good. Because usually the story with the self-esteem is I'm not good enough. Yeah, that'll be your prevailing story in life that you're trying to disprove constantly. And through that disapproval of that narrative, it can create a lot of havoc in your life, because you're constantly trying to show the world that you are good enough. So any sign of you not being good enough will be seen as attack. Yeah. Another way in which it can be difficult in our social world and the world we live in now is body image. Body image comes up a lot, even with the men I work with, how we view our body images. It's very easy to look online and go, everyone looks great, everyone's got six packs. I once did too. I do aim to get back there. And we feel like we're nothing. We're pieces of shit. Again, it's this kind of piece of shit. Maybe your inner voice isn't so harsh, but I've spoken to enough men to know that telling themselves they're a piece of shit is a pretty common one. It's very easy to go and see all these wonderful bodybuilders or these wonderful coaches or whoever it may be, David Goggins, and see you in great shape, and you look at your slightly chubby belly and you feel like you're not good enough. Or you look at some dude with massive arms and your arms are way smaller than that, right? It can be very, very difficult. Another way it's difficult to build self-esteem, the common challenges we have is we live in a world that's prevailingly negative, right? If you go on to most people's social media accounts, the comments where people write are incredibly negative, judgmental. And we read these and I think they really filter into how we view ourselves. They're how we see ourselves. We live in a very negative world, which means we're internalizing that negativity. Yeah, we're internalizing some of that negativity. So it's all around us. The newspapers, everything is very much has a negative slant on it, or an attention on the negative. So it's just to start to pay attention that, this seeps into you. And this is a challenge in building self-esteem, because there's constant negativity, and that feeds into our already existing negative internal talk about ourselves, about how good we are. So what can you do? What can we do about our self-esteem, right? There's a few techniques I'm going to talk about here that are science-backed, that are research-backed. Some of them I'll talk about my own experience with them, and so forth. One of the really highly recommended ones is affirmations. I know some people really hate affirmations. I have a kind of mixed relationship with affirmations, but there's a lot of research behind it to say, there's even, I've got here the British Journal of Social Psychology found that daily affirmations improve participants' self-esteem and reduce their stress over a 6-week period. That's pretty conclusive, right? And there's many a study like this in the US and the UK. Affirmations help. I think some of the studies, I read another article about a study that said that the problem with affirmations is we have to use affirmations that feel like they are partially true or a little bit true. If they feel too far away and too far removed from where we are, they actually do more damage than good, right? So this is something I do a lot with my clients, is if I help them with kind of affirmations or the story they tell themselves, sometimes we have to look and go, okay, what can you believe? And often what happens is, if I say this affirmation every day, you go, I don't believe this one. And then we may have to search for a bit of evidence in your life that this is true, some evidence of things you've done or achieved or accomplished and so forth. And then people can get on board with them. I do think they have a lot of value, affirmations, because it's a counterbalance to the way that we talk to ourselves, right? I think that I did a bit of tapping for a while, and I still do from time to time. Maybe not as regularly as I did for a while, but they're not really sure why tapping's so useful. From what I've read, there's some to do with it's certain meridians on the body, and some people believe it's just because of the words we're saying. We're saying positive statements to ourselves continuously every day, and I think that does tap into the kind of affirmations piece. So tapping's another way which can be really good for self-esteem, and there's a lot of tapping videos you can go and find for free, or you can find a tapping coach or therapist, right? Journaling, right? Gratitude, journaling in general. Again, there's huge amounts of research, right, to show that when we journal, it helps us with our levels of happiness and self-esteem. I think there's an University of Oxford study that showed participants who maintained a gratitude journal for 4 weeks reported higher levels of happiness, self-esteem compared to those who did not. And it's as simple as, writing down 3 things, 5 things that you're grateful for. I once did a month-long challenge of writing down 108 things, I think it was, that I was grateful for every night, which was really very, very powerful, right? Even now, when I do my evening practice, I've got morning practice and evening practice now. I do some breathing, I do some meditation. And before I do the breathing, I just scan through my day. I scan through my day and be like, what am I grateful for? What do I feel good about from today? I pick, anything from 3 to 5 things. Just in my mind. I don't even write them down. Just think of them in my mind for a moment and pause. And I say a moment, it could be 30 seconds to a minute. Just pause on those and be grateful for what went on, for what happened. It's a really powerful practice, gratitude, because we're not grateful enough as people. Because we have our expectations of ourselves, or our little voice in our head does. And I've said this before and I'll say it again, is the things that we expect, we struggle to be grateful for. So, if we are in a relationship and we have expectations of a partner, we are often not grateful for the things that we expect of people, right? So what gratitude journaling shifts in us is like, maybe we have some expectations of ourselves. We can be grateful for those things that we accomplished. Like, I got out of bed today. And that sounds so minor. I got out to bed on time. Or for me, I am really grateful. I spent 4 hours this morning with Bjorn, even though he barely slept. So I was awake, which I normally would be, but I didn't get to, start work early as I'd like to. I didn't get to meditate for as long as I'd like to, and so forth, because I was awake with him. But I can be grateful. If I expect that he should go to sleep, it's very easy for me to feel ungrateful for him being awake, or I can be grateful for him being awake. And it might sound like just mind tricks, but in fact, this is what self-esteem is. It's, as I said before, it's our subjective view of ourselves. It's the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, which is just a story that we get to make up. You get to make it up, or you get to decide how you focus, right? How you focus it. This next one I'm going to say is something I use a lot. Visualization, right? Visualization is a really powerful way to really improve our the way we see ourselves. I know there's an article I read a little while ago. I think it was about LeBron James, and he would have spent hours visualizing him hitting shots from different parts of the court. He used to visualize it. And it might sound all woo-woo and very all about the secret and manifestation, but there's a lot of stuff that backs up, especially around sports and performance, right? Visualization of ourselves doing things. And again, I think it's often important, and this isn't the science-backed thing, this is my opinion, is the visualization of things that we see as probable and possible. Yeah. If you're visualizing you're going to get £1 million in 10 minutes time, you probably won't believe it. But if you visualize that, I don't know what you do, or in your relationship, that when your partner gets angry with you, you can stay calm and grounded and respond. And you really visualize that again and again. And you really feel what it's like to be relaxed. You breathe into it, you embody it. it's going to shift something in you when those scenarios come up, because you've really rehearsed it in your mind. Your mind kind of knows what to do. It's not a surprise. It's not a thing it's unsure about. So I'm a big fan of visualization. I do some sort of visualization pretty much every day. I think it's a very important piece to integrate. And like I said, there's plenty of research about that. Another thing that's really important is exercise, right? When it comes to building self-esteem, exercise and looking after our bodies, because there's just the very simple self-esteem you gain from just knowing that this is something you've done and you've created, right? It might be you do some yoga, you might do exercise, you might run marathons, whatever it is. You know, as an anecdotal thing, when I ran a half marathon a few years ago, I think it's almost 8 years now. And at the end of that half marathon, I remember sitting down as me and my friend Ahmad, AJ, used to be on the podcast. We were sitting on some grass. It was in Hackney. And I was sitting there and I said to him, I was like, you know, we've talked, me and AJ on the podcast, we'll talk about Shookman. We did an episode recently about fear and so forth a few months back. The character Shookman is like the inner critic. And I said, you know what, right now, after I've just done this half marathon, Shookman's got nothing to say to me. That hour, I was like, I felt so accomplished in myself. I felt so like confident in myself after running that half marathon. It was incredible, because there's a feeling of like, I fucking did this, you know, I fucking did this. So don't underestimate the power of doing exercise, however small, you know, if it's stretching every day and a bit of yoga every day or every other day and some strength training or whatever it is. There's a real power in self-confidence. It releases a lot of really good hormones, endorphins and all sorts, right? Serotonin, all that jazz. Something else that's really great for our self-esteem is social connection. And when I say social connection, I don't just mean relationships, sexual relationships or romantic relationships and dating. Social connection in general. And this is another piece of, you know, when I work with men, is I ask them about their social connections. We talk about this. Who's in your life? Who are you spending time with? What friends have you got? Are those friends good for you? You know, they're good for your mental health and who you are. Can you open up and share with them? And if sometimes and often the answer is no, then we talk about how to make new friends or deepen the friendships with the people that they like. It's a really important one, because often we don't, you know, we might know people we really like already, but the friendships just aren't as deep as we'd like them to be. Become a master at something. Develop a skill and mastery, right? When we have low self-esteem, we often will actually move away from, as you probably noticed, actually, let me say this. When we have low self-esteem, all the things that would give us self-esteem, we often move away from. It sounds very counterintuitive, doesn't it? You know, like if you've got low self-esteem, if someone said, okay, let's learn a new skill, the first thought you'll have is like, no, I can't do that. I'll fail at it. But in fact, those are the things that will help you, which is often the thing in life, right? The things that we shy away from, the things that will help us grow. So when it comes to like being a master at something, that's learning a skill and becoming very good at it, right? That could be glass blowing. My sister went glass blowing last week and she was telling me about it. It sounded amazing. You could, you know, but becoming a master at something because you're seeing yourself capable. You're seeing yourself become an expert. You're seeing yourself become a master. And there's a huge amount of benefit internally in the mind and in the body doing that. So really learning to master something. Something else that I think is always important when it comes to building self-esteem is working on social skills. Because the chances are, if you've got very low self-esteem, there's somewhere in your social life that you are avoiding, you are like holding back, you are, you know, you're not really leaning in. And through working on your social skills, you'll just gain confidence and self-belief on what you can do and self-esteem. It's something I've seen time and again. And, you know, I've worked with men in social skills for the best part of kind of 15, 16 years, right? And I've seen it firsthand. Men's absolute whole lives transform and self-esteem transform from being good socially, right? And sometimes it's being good in relationship. I think there's a real benefit to learning the skills of being a good relationship person, a good partner in helping your self-esteem. You know, I know I work for a lot of men whose self-esteem is very low around relationship stuff, about communication, maybe sex and sexuality. It might be dealing with conflict or leadership or leading a relationship, right? And it impacts how they show up in the relationship. So when they start to perfect the skills, we start to work on really having some mastery in the area of relationship, the area of sexuality, right? Sexual confidence. Their whole perspective on themselves starts to shift, and it helps them be more present and aware as well. Some of the other things that can help us with our building self-esteem, mindfulness, separating ourselves from the stories, you know. There's many ways you can separate yourself from the stories you tell yourself. You know, I talked about affirmations before, but there's also, you know, we talked about affirmations and journaling, gratitude journaling and regular journaling as well. But there's also just like really observing the mind, like learning to separate you and who you are, the witness, the holder of the vessel, from what's inside the vessel. We'll call it water or thoughts, because often we mistake our thoughts for who we are. You know, I am my thoughts, and you're not your thoughts. Your thoughts you have. Many of the thoughts you have aren't even yours. They're thoughts that have permeated into your brain from people you don't know and like, you know, from watching, being around your parents, or from family members or teachers, right? Or things you just watched on TV. Many of the thoughts you have come from those places. They're not your thoughts, so they're not who you are. So separating yourself from those thoughts is a very, very powerful and beneficial exercise. It's not going to be easy, you know. That's why people meditate for days and hours on end, because the benefit is so huge of self-esteem. It's very easy to kind of forget that, right? I think there's another piece about self-esteem, and I kind of mentioned it, but I didn't go into too deeply, is like really being mindful of who you put yourself around, you know, the sort of friends you have. And obviously family's harder if you spend time with them, but nonetheless be more choosy. But the sort of people you spend your time with, like, how do they talk to you? How do you allow people to talk to you? How do you allow people to treat you? Is that the way you want to be treated, or would you like to be treated differently or better? You know, because you're responsible for that. You're responsible for how you allow people to treat you. Yes. You might go, oh no, but if they treat, you know, they're responsible for how they treat me. No, you're responsible for how you allow them to treat you, because at any moment you can stop them from treating you that way by removing yourself. That's always the option you have, by removing yourself, by telling them that you no longer want to be treated that way, and that there'll be consequence if they continue to do so. Whether that's, you know, removal of love, attention, energy, right? That's what you have. Boundaries. You see, like just enacting things like that in your life, boundaries, making requests as well, boosts our self-esteem, because people, if you see yourself as someone worthy of having good boundaries and being treated well, it's cyclical. You start to enact boundaries, people start to respect your boundaries, or you follow through on the consequences that you explain in those boundaries. And again, boom, self-esteem increases. But it's a constant thing here, right? You don't just like do 3 things and suddenly got self-esteem. Yeah, you don't go and get a really good job and make loads of money and self-esteem suddenly skyrockets and stays that way. It doesn't. It's a constant working, it's a constant practice. You know, something you got to practice continuously. It doesn't just, you know, you do it once and it's done. It's important to remember that. And I guess one of the pitfalls of, I'll finish up, one of the pitfalls really is not only relying on external validation. It can be very easy to live on a diet of external validation. You know, we see in the social media world, the diet of likes and comments as a external validation. And we're like, oh, I'm validated today. Oh, I got lots of likes. Next day I didn't get likes. My self-esteem is low. Then we're on the self-esteem roller coaster. Yeah. Or money. You know, oh, I'm making lots of money. I'm a good person. I have value. I'm not making lots of money. I'm a piece of shit. It's really easy to be on that, right? So it's been really mindful of that as a way not to go, because when you tie your self-esteem to external things very tightly, then they just drag you around. They will drag you around wherever they go, up and down on that roller coaster. So, it's why often people feel absolutely devastated when they, lose fortune, because they're like, my money's gone, I'm worthless. So it's been really mindful of that. Or say you're a great sportsman, or even if, you're great in the gym, whatever, you tie your worth to something external, something that, is outside of you. As you probably notice, a lot of the things really in building self-esteem is about living with awareness and consciousness, right? Being aware, right? Living consciously, being aware of what's happening, being aware of what's going through your mind, being aware of the things you do, being aware of the impact of the things you do. It's also accepting the nature of life, right? Self-compassion. I didn't touch on that before, but self-compassion is a really important part of self-esteem, in my opinion. Because often when we have low self-esteem, we talk to ourselves like we're shit, right? We talk to ourselves like we're a piece of shit, our inner critic, our shook man voice. Self-compassion is an antidote to that. And it's a wonderful book called the Self-Compassion Workbook. I've been reading through it over the last few weeks before bed. But self-compassion is a wonderful antidote to that. Seeing ourselves as human, seeing ourselves as like flawed in a way. We all make mistakes, not seeing other people as perfect and us as useless, right? That shared humanity, being gentle with ourselves as well in time. That's that self-compassion. I think I'm going to do a episode on self-compassion. Maybe I'll even do a workshop on it. So I think it's a really important piece. It's been really important for me to shift from like this kind of driving force of harshness and harsh words to actually just a little of gentleness. It's just giving me a bit more room to move and be free. And another piece is obviously being responsible for yourself, right? To boost your self-esteem, you need to be responsible for you and your life and where your life's going. Really simple. To boost and grow your self-esteem, you need to take responsibility of your life. And that can be to create goals that are meaningful to you. Start achieving the things that you really want. Go after the things you want, right? And I know that sometimes in doing that, there's that feeling of, I'm going to fail. It's like, well, actually, this is where the visualization comes in. This is why the affirmations come in. It's like, I'm willing to think of myself as something different. Am I willing to dare? Am I willing to be brave and courageous? And then you often have to also assert yourself in the world. Be like, these are what I want, express your wants and needs if we're in a relationship context to build the self-esteem, right? So these are some of the things to take away when it comes to self-esteem. And there's, so many little bits and pieces. As I mentioned, I've got a workshop coming up on the 13th. All the details in the show notes. You can find them down there. Show notes details down there. I've also got a program coming up for avoidant men. That's going to be in September. And that's going to be a core piece of that's going to be around building self-esteem. It's just baked into the whole program all along the way. Because it's a really important part of improving our communication, improving how we respond and react, is building our self-esteem. So I hope you wonderful people have a wonderful day. If there's someone in your life this would be useful to, a friend, an ex-boyfriend, whoever, feel free to send this over to them. A little shout out to the many women that listen to the podcast who share the podcast with men, or the many women who recommend men to work with me. Ex-girlfriends seems to be a common one at the moment. A big thank you. Doing some great work for some of those men. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.